Meet Reed Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling award-winning author, and unabashedly, unapologetically on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reed is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reed.
Howdy, listeners from coast to coast, the Gulf to the first 51st state, and I can even say that with a straight face, and around the globe. Reed Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio and the Cowboys Take on all those video channels everywhere, except, I'll warn you, YouTube doesn't like us. Maybe it's the nasty things I say about Google. Could be. All true, of course. And maybe it's just their, internal censorship logarithms, or our, truth that we speak on the COVID and the COVID jab, or I don't know, once in a while we praise Trump. Maybe they don't like that. Who knows? So Rumble and Gab and Truth and X and all those things, that's kind of my suggestion for you. Now, if you do get us on YouTube, terrific. Like any of the other sites, throw us a like, hit that bell so you know when these come out. Send these links on to people who really need to have this information, which I think is like all Americans right now. And that is much appreciated, as is your listening to me and watching my ugly maw yak, yak, yak. All right. So we're going to do a little current events, rat-a-tat-tat. Because there's, there's some, I'll tell you what, I could probably just do 5 shows a week, 2 hours a day, just on rat-a-tat-tat, jaw-dropping current events. So I try and pick out the best because I go through a lot of them. And then we're going to talk the big macro picture out there, okay? And I've been doing this, if you've noticed, over the last 2 months, a lot. I've been bringing you little dabs of history. The last show, we went over the lead up to World War I. Even if you aren't a history buff, a student of history, I'm sure you were struck by the interesting parallels between that time period and this one. All you had to do was change the names of the countries and the rulers, and you're pretty much right where we're at right now. History is a great teacher. Touchstone of the past is the guidepost to the future, which of course is why they like to attack it, All right, so why don't we start off with our rant story? So the rant story, I was going to bring you another one, but I'm actually going to tell you that this show is late by one day because I was coming back from a meeting on I-25, northbound. Come on back, rubber duck. And fortunately, I was only about 30 miles from town and maybe an hour from the ranch. And all of a sudden, there was like a little hiccup in the truck, and then it died. Terrific. Not good. The last time that happened, and I really hope, I'm knocking on wood that this is not the deal. I'm hoping, and everybody thinks it's just the alternator. But there was this little clunk, and then it just kind of died. I tried to start it a couple times, drifted over the side of the road, obviously. Tried to start it a couple times. It turned right over. It ran. And then 4 or 5 seconds later, just like the very first time it cut out, the battery light came on. But let's fast forward. I am a member of AAA, and AAA is terrific. And so I got out, tried to figure out if I could fix anything. No luck. And then I called AAA, and within an hour, they had a truck there. I mean, the moral of this story is AAA is your friend, folks. Yeah? AAA. If you don't have it, may I suggest you get it, because 3 tows a year are free. And if you live in any area like this, or you, shall we say, less than trust your vehicle 100%, or know that something can go wrong, they will save your bacon. Yes, they will. All right. So that's the rant story and the motto of the rant story today. Grab your AAA and hold on tight. And the founder's quote. We're not going to do a founder's quote tonight. And the reason we're not going to do a founder's quote is because I didn't find one really that fit in with this show. Because in some cases, even though the history lesson of the last show, and if you didn't listen to it, please do. You can catch it on all the channels, comment on it, please do. Or you can catch it on therightsideradio.com, listen to the audio. You know, that's where the radio shows go up. They are just audio, not video. You are deprived of the pleasure of watching me. Poor you. It's really something you ought to listen to, and it leads into a little bit what we're going to talk about in this show, which is the macro. And I didn't find a founder's quote because really, in this case, the founders did not face a situation like we face today. And I'll leave it at that. I think you'll understand when we get into it, which will be in just a few minutes after rat-a-tat-tat. So, rat-a-tat-tat. You have heard, of course, that Ukraine destroyed, who knows which propaganda is correct, somewhere around 35 to 40 key plane assets, Air Force assets of Russia. Some people say a third of their nuclear delivery fleet, if you will, of planes, in a rather daring and well thought out raid very deep in Russian territory. And everybody cheered that. But folks, you better be careful of poking a bear and then putting it in a corner, because I can tell you that bears like to fight, and they really fight hard when they feel they're in a corner and poke too hard. So it's going that little rat-a-tat-tat is going to tie into what we're going to talk about on the big macro global picture here in just a little bit. And we'll see what the fallout is, and we'll see what Russia's retaliation is, and we'll see what the effect is on the quote-unquote peace talks, which, of course, Xi, as I told you 2 shows ago, has told Putin in no way, shape, or form are you to make peace with NATO, because I want the United States engaged and I want their resources drained. I absolutely flatly guarantee you that's going on, okay? Tariffs. Okay, so the mainstream media and all the moron economists out there like Paul Krugman from the New York Times, I mean, this guy's never been right. He can't add 2 plus 2. But they told you that these tariffs are going to be wildly inflationary and American families are going to pay umpty-ump thousands of dollars more per year. Well, the history, that pesky history thing, history usually shows that tariffs are deflationary. Think about this. All these same people were pointing at Schmoot-Hawley, okay, or Hawley-Schmoot, whatever you want to call it. The tariffs, right, that the president prior to FDR put in place in 1928 that everybody blames for 1929. And these Smoot-Hawley tariffs were pretty wide-ranging. I think it was over on 10,000 different items in all sorts of countries, etc. Do you know what the 1929 bust was, right? The Great Depression? It was called the Great Depression, folks, because prices went down. In fact, they plummeted downwards. It was highly deflationary. And what are we seeing here in the stats over the last few weeks? Jobs are down. By the way, adjusted 95,000 jobs down for the last 2 months, in addition to being down this month at 137,000 jobs. And I assume that'll get adjusted down also. And prices are down. In some cases, they're just down 0.1% on their various indicators, the PCE and the CPI and blah, 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 blah. I don't believe any of them. And they're all understated. But nonetheless, the trend of prices is down. Eggs have dropped from about $6, $6.50 a dozen, to $2.50 to $3 a dozen. I'm just taking one little thing that you use probably quite often and every day. So when the mainstream media, to get at Trump, and when the moron economists who studied under Keynes, who didn't know his ass from a hole in the ground, remember what the reality of tariffs usually is. There's always exceptions, and there may be exceptions in certain specific commodities or goods or services. And that, folks, is deflation. Deflation. Think about that, you homeowners out there, particularly in the face of rising interest rates. And that Smoot-Hawley deal, the next time you hear somebody tell you about how Smoot-Hawley caused the depression and inflation, you can just laugh and say, no, it didn't cause the depression, and it caused deflation. That's the facts, Jack. Welcome to the history books. Oh, the Arizona Supreme Court. They have decided that they're going to use AI to render decisions and issue orders. Wow. Now that's kind of scary, okay? Because you know AI is only as good as the people who program the AI. Now, the Arizona Supreme Court assures all of us in the United States and the residents of Arizona for whom they work for and from whom they draw their paycheck that don't you worry about it whatsoever. These avatars, they literally said avatars, are just helping us write court decisions. They have nothing to do with the decision itself. No, no, no. So don't you worry about AI running your court systems, folk, because just because they're doing it, it ain't going to happen. Okay, there you go. We'll keep our eye on that one. And then have you heard of Fusarium graminearum? And I probably mispronounced that, but you get the idea. This is a nasty fungus, and it attacks all sorts of plants and crops like barley, maize, rice. It makes animals and humans vomit. It causes liver damage, and it interferes with reproduction. Oh. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because two Chinese students, one of them a disciple of and has huge involvement with the CCP, they smuggled that nasty little fungus critter into the country, and they were welcomed without a permit to conduct research on it at the University of Pennsylvania. Okay, that's great. So that tells you a little bit about our universities. It tells you a little bit about our control of nasty stuff coming across the border and people coming across the border. And it also tells you to what lengths China will stoop to undermine the United States, which will tie into where we're going with the big portion of this show. They've been arrested. Hopefully the fungus has not escaped. All right. And by the way, that's called agroterrorism, folks. And all they have to do is get it in a water supply that supplies water for crops or supplies fertilizer for crops, then we have a big problem. And that's pretty easy to do in the United States because we're asleep at the switch. Asleep at the switch. I'm going to bring you much more in the next show, which I am going to get out in the next few days, on what is going on in the courts. I mean, the courts are rocking and rolling on decisions. The Supreme Court, for all you folks who like the Second Amendment and have firearms, quite amazingly, did not take up two lower court cases. One was a ban on semi-automatics and anything more than 10 rounds in a magazine in Maryland, and the other was a ban in Rhode Island on AK and AR style base rifles. The Supreme Court didn't take it up, and the lower courts had ruled against the person trying to assert his Second Amendment rights. So those decisions right now stand. Now, the Supreme Court, mostly Kavanaugh, assures everybody that the Supreme Court is going to look at this. There's other cases coming up, and they want to look at them all at once. I hope so, because this is a big crack in the armor in the Second Amendment, and it's something that we really need to watch like a hawk, particularly since this occurred at the Supreme Court level. You know, the courts have also made some good decisions. I'm just going to give you one because we're going to go into this. I'm going to spend about 10 minutes on court decisions here in the next show because some of you will just shake your head at. Others you may applaud. The Supreme Court did, in virtually the same session as their lousy rulings on the Second Amendment, they did determine that this was all nonsense and DOJ could access Social Security records. Well, that's good. Maybe we can get those 23 million dead people, illegal aliens, non-U.S. citizens, etc., off the rolls and save ourselves tens of billions a year. What do you think? What a great idea. All right. Let's talk about big picture, shall we? I've brought you a number of facts, lots of history, and my assumptions, my opinions, which I clearly label them for what they are when that is what they are. And one of the things which disturbs my thought that Russia takes Eurasia and Europe, China takes the South Pacific and most of Asia, and the United States takes the Western Hemisphere, and it's all kumbaya, well, uneasy kumbaya, is that China, China is run by humans. And humans, when they think they have the upper hand, tend to get, shall we say, a little carried away, a little bit greedy. They reach too far. You see this on the left all the time. And right now, China, they've cut off access basically for the rest of the planet to rare earths, which could cripple the tech industries in the United States and Europe and anywhere else they may try to exist or flourish, and obviously interfere with military production, which I'm sure doesn't break China's heart at all. And though Xi and Trump are supposedly talking, once again, I don't think it's in China's best interests, and they know it, to make any speedy deal, to make any quick resolution with the United States, or to allow any quick resolution between Russia, the United States, Ukraine, and Europe, or between Iran and the United States and Israel, and I can go on down the list. Because the more we're engaged, the thinner we are spread, and the more money that we don't have, we are spending. I think that's kind of the deal. And the tariffs, I want you to understand something. The tariffs, we talked about in the rat-tat-tat, they're not inflationary, they are deflationary, okay? 99 times out of 100. And these tariffs that Trump has imposed are really not, they're really not tariffs. They're really kind of formulated based on a country's trade surplus with the United States. The higher the trade surplus, in other words, the more money a country is making from exporting to us than we are making from importing to them, the higher the tariffs. I mean, you can see it all the way through what the administration has done with tariffs. By the way, tariff revenue is up around $46 or $47 billion here in just 4 months, which is going to the Treasury and reducing the deficit, which is otherwise out of control because Congress are morons. So they're also having that effect. And they've really just started to kind of get rolling, if you know what I mean. But in history, there's always been 4 big forces that drive kind of an upheaval on the planet. And we've talked about, I think 3 or 4 shows ago, please listen to it if you did not, all the cycles that are converging right now. The Kondratiev wave in economics, the Elliott wave in markets, the fourth turning in terms of social structure and demographics. And I tracked those back in that show 400 years, because that's the last time all of these converged at once, along with some astrological things, which, if you believe in it, also kind of coincided. You might want to listen to that show. On the rightsideradio.com, check the archives, or of course, any of the video channels, all the shows are listed. So these 4 big forces throughout history that kind of drive everything, all right? These are all interconnected, all interconnected. First of all, you have the monetary and the credit cycles. This is where nations get into a sovereign debt problem. Gee, does this sound familiar? And it needs to be dealt with. Unfortunately, we're not dealing with it too well. But the other countries on the planet are, all of them, maybe many of them to a lesser degree than we are, all are having a sovereign debt crisis, including, by the way, China. Number two is domestic conflict. And it typically begins with political disagreement, which we certainly have plenty of around the globe right now, never mind the United States. And that conflict becomes something more than disagreement when the disagreement is not resolved by discourse. And of course, in countries like Great Britain, who are throwing people in jail for memes, right? You know, comedy. You can't have discourse because it's disinformation. You're not speaking the government speak. And so that's going to lead to what? Oh, conflict. That's right. Number three, you have throughout history a rising power challenging the existing power, right? The new hegemon coming up, the old hegemon struggling to maintain its position. I've given you countless history stories on that. In fact, the show before last, or the show before that, I went all the way back to the 1600s and gave you example after example after example of a rising hegemon and a hegemon struggling to maintain its position and eventually losing it. And the fourth thing are technological changes that assist in disrupting what everybody's used to, the status quo. You had the Industrial Revolution. Oh, by the way, that was 80 years ago? Oh, the fourth turning. There we go. Absolutely. And 100 years ago, right? The Kondratiev wave. It's pretty amazing how all this stuff how history rinses and repeats, is it not? And we certainly have huge technological changes coming our way now, right? In all sorts of ways. Quantum computers, AI, you name it. This is going to be highly disruptive. Lots of people are going to lose their jobs. You're going to see this unemployment thing go kind of bananas throughout the Western world and the developed parts of Asia, in my opinion. So, how does all this play out, right? The issue, let's boil it down to the China-U.S. trade issue. This is not a trade issue, folks. I want you to understand this. This is why China is not making a deal. This is why China is, I am 100% positive, telling all its axis, Iran, Russia, Turkey, you name it, to not make a deal with the United States, to not create peace in Ukraine, to not, accede to the demands for non-nuclear proliferation in Iran. This is not about fair trade. There was a Greek finance minister. His name was Yanis Varoufakis, very famous guy. And he dropped some really hard truths about the U.S.-China trade war. Number one, and I think the guy's right on, okay? Ties right into my theories, ties right into the history I've brought you, ties right into the actual geopolitical and, shall we say, interrelationship dots between all the countries on the planet right now. And all the systems, the financial systems, the technological advances, et cetera, because all these things are intertwined. But the U.S. doesn't fear China because of cheap labor or IP theft or fentanyl. Yes, those are considerations, but they're used as cloaks to mask the real fear of the U.S. And the real fear of the U.S. is the capacity of China to undermine the U.S.-led global financial order. And I'm not talking just about the dollar. I'm talking about the SWIFT system and who controls the flow of currencies and who controls the price of commodities, like on the COMEX, etc. Okay, this is an upheaval from end to end and top to bottom, and it's really a struggle. It's really a war. That's what it is. It's really a war for the future of global finance. That's really what this is. It's a much bigger thing than, you sell us some, Chinese food and we sell you some grains. It's way, way, way more than that. Wall Street is an aging financial architecture, okay? And it's losing its grip. And all its henchmen and allies and associated outfits, whether it's the Federal Reserve or whether it's the COMEX on which commodity prices are fixed and commodities are traded in the futures market, they're all losing their grip, right? Wall Street can't control crypto, right? It can't control Bitcoin, let's say. Although obviously it's made inroads with the EFTs and I think polluted what Bitcoin was supposed to be about, but my opinion. It can't keep up with new financial ecosystems. China now has a digital yuan, and they have the EP and EM systems. I've told you about that. I brought you a whole show on that like 6 months ago. I got letters saying, you're crazy, you're crazy. Well, I got some stats that I'm about to share with you. Unfortunately, I wish I was crazy, but unfortunately, it's happening, and it's happening with lightning speed, okay? The control of global currencies, the flow of currencies for trade, is quickly shifting to China and away from the United States. China has its digital yuan. It has its vast industrial base, which we don't have. Trump wants to rebuild. Its rising global influence because of his brilliant strategy with the Silk Road deal. I brought you the history of the Silk Road about 8-9 months ago. You should really listen to those shows, guys. It's phenomenal what China is doing and the plan that they have and the plan that they stick to. Trump's reciprocal tariffs, quote unquote, reciprocal tariffs, they were never about balancing trade. You got to understand this. They're a desperate attempt to slow China down through using other countries, using allies, using using whatever the United States can throw at the emerging China hegemon. And this whole thing comes down to the cross-border transfer systems between countries for trade. So here's some scary stats for you. And you know what? I actually spent about an hour researching Western news. I didn't find a single friggin' article, not a single friggin' article on this incredible information. For the first time ever, China's CIPS, which is cross-border interbank payment system, China's CIPS surpassed the SWIFT system. That's the Western world, led by the United States. Their system for payment between countries and through the World Bank and through the BIS and all that kind of stuff. China surpassed the United States and the Western world, and it's remained ahead in one day, and that was April 16th, 2025 at 1:30 a.m. I can tell you the exact moment. And at that point, folks, although I hate to be the bearer of this news, and I think it figures prominently, Besant is a smart guy, okay? Trump is a smart guy. They know what's going on. The Western press doesn't have a clue. Western economists are all Keynesians, which got us into this fix to begin with, not Austrian economics, which is, you never go over budget and you back everything with something solid like gold. Gee, exactly what China is doing. China is setting up warehouses around the world where when you use their CIPS system, if there's any imbalance in the payment, you're low or you're high or whatever, the difference will be made up in gold. And with the number of, should we say, gold dispensaries, gold vaults that they're setting up around the United States, not or the United States, the globe, this will be easy for any country to get their hands on gold to settle up payments. It's one step away, one tiny step away from a gold-backed trade system and a gold-backed currency transfer system. They are on the verge of it, folks, on the verge of it. So CIPS, China's, we'll call it global transfer system, processed 12.8 trillion RMB, Chinese currency, the yuan, in one day. That's one day. That's equivalent to about 1.76 trillion in US dollars. That volume, by the way, overtakes the dollar and the SWIFT system during that time period by a factor of several times. There were no fireworks, there were no Western headlines, of course, but one quiet early morning in Beijing in April of this year, just a month or two ago, the dollar's crown slipped. Think about that. Think about that. And also, folks, don't rely solely on Western propaganda, disinformation, misinformation, psyops, media. Don't do it. The rise of the CIPS system, China's system, has been phenomenal. It's been literally overnight. I mean, literally, in the course of a year to year and a half, their system that they've set up has now become, let me get the exact number here, has now become more than 50% of world trade. That's in a year and a half. 50% of world trade. And they're not done. And they haven't gone to a full gold-backed system yet. But they have the gold to do it. And inbound, non-banking, cross-border payments, which is part of the CIPS system and part of the SWIFT system, which takes days rather than seconds, because the yuan has been digitalized, the dollar has not. That's gone literally to over or close to 50% in that same year and a half, from virtually zero, both of those stats, virtually zero. I don't need to kind of interpolate or push out that graph for you, right? I mean, if they continue at that rate, the Western system, the SWIFT system, is going to be down to a paltry somewhere 18 to 20% of global trade here, maybe by the end of this year, certainly by the first half of 2026. Think about what that means to you, because it means a lot to you. And a lot of people have been jumping up and down saying, how come the United States can't do what Milei down in Argentina is doing? And he's making great inroads. Argentina is rocking and rolling. And there was a lot of pain at first when he basically cut the budget, cut the government, the chainsaw deal, the whole 9 yards. But he has lowered inflation from like 35 or 40% a year to like 8 or 9, and it's still falling. Jobs are increasing. The economy is booming. I mean, his plan is working. And everybody goes, how come we can't do that here? Well, the problem here, and this is something for you to think about. The problem here is that our debt is too large. And because U.S. Treasuries, right, the Treasury market, which is the only tier 1 asset in the world, questionable, along with gold, they're embedded in the very fabric of global financial markets. I mean, even the CIPS system, in some ways, relies on the American bond system, although China is setting up its own bond system also. So Get ready for changes there. And paying down that debt by the United States, which is evidenced by these bonds, the T-bills, the T-notes, the 30-year treasuries, et cetera, the 10-year treasuries, paying down that debt has ramifications in the United States. Milei simply doesn't have to contend with down there in Argentina because he doesn't have the reserve currency of the world, and he doesn't have the largest bond market in the world. And he doesn't have a debt which is, on a percentage basis, the ungodly percentages over GDP we do here. So that's the reason. I could go on, but I think that's enough to think about tonight. Those stats on the CIPS, the Chinese we'll call it global transfer system, are something that you need to digest and think about. The rise in that system, the rapidity with which that system has taken over the landscape of global trade is absolutely stunning and breathtaking. And remember that they have not fully backed it with gold. They've allowed settlements in surpluses or underages in gold. And they have abolished all the laws that made foreigners go through Chinese intermediaries to deal with gold when it comes to China. That's now a free and open, well, I'm not sure it's free. It is China. It is China. They are communists. But it is an open system and open across borders and open to all nationalities. So that, folks, is what all this hubbub is about and what Trump is trying to, in the best way he can, given the fact the communists who preceded him, the 3 terms of Obama, etc., significantly and purposefully sabotage his ability to deal with this problem. You know, the Cloward and Piven theory, I brought you that show too. All right. In this upcoming show, we're going to talk the real estate markets because we now have some more stats. We're going to talk the courts. And I may even delve a little bit more into this macro thing that's going on around the planet in terms of the global financial war. And that's what it is. It's a global financial war. And you need to govern yourself accordingly. You need to take the steps to protect you and your families. Hard assets, things that can't be duplicated, things which are scarce. You need to really think this through, folks. If you think your Kia or your 401k plan or all that stuff is going to be your savior or your pension, I suggest that you get a second life raft inflated as quickly as you can. And one last thought before I say goodbye today. Today is June 6th. 82 years ago, the Allies invaded Normandy. Omaha Beach, Utah Beach, Sword Beach, Gold Beach, Juno Beach, the Pointe du Hoc Cliffs, St. Mire-Église, the bridges on the Orne River, glider attacks, paratroopers, the 101st and the 82nd Airborne, and of course, the English and the French, the Free French. I just want to say thank you. There's not many of that greatest generation left that participated in that battle. But I just want to say thank you from me, and I'm sure from everybody who's listening to me right now, and from Americans everywhere of every age, deceased or living. Thank you to those of you who still walk the earth, and thank you to all of you who do not. And a particular thank you to those of you who gave your lives or your limbs or your futures for freedom when freedom was freedom, and liberty when liberty was liberty, against the greatest threat the world had ever seen at that time. Thank you. From one American to another. This is Reed Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio and the Cowboys Take. You keep the wind at your back. We'll talk to you in a few days. Pass this show on, like it, subscribe, hit that bell so you know when it comes out. And thanks for listening.
Please remember, if you've missed any shows, just click on Show Archive and you'll find all of his shows. We look forward to seeing you here again next week for another episode of Read Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side.